The Watchmen Chapter 6 The Abyss Gazes Also by Sasha Baldwin. Chapter 6 follows Dr. Long's journal entries as he attempts to fix Rorschach through therapy sessions after Rorschach was caught and put in prison. Dr. Long calls Rorschach Walter to humanize him, but he loses the grasp on calling him that and goes through a de-evolution of self as he learns more about Rorschach. The chapter begins by showing a Rorschach ink blot that appears in this chapter over 20 times. This image heavily relates to the progression of Kovacs becoming Rorschach. When Dr. Long first shows Rorschach the image, he says he sees a pretty butterfly, although the reader sees, on page 1, panel 7, what he truly sees. On page 7, panel 1, the fruit smashed into his face also looks very similar to the ink blot, and also on page 7, panel 7, his outburst is referred to as a mad dog, so it connects back to the split dog head image. The next time the ink blot gives more insight to why Rorschach became Rorschach happens on page 21, panel 6, when Kovacs tells the story of him splitting the dog heads and opening his eyes as Rorschach instead of as Kovacs. Throughout this process, Dr. Long also begins to see Kovacs as Rorschach instead of Kovacs, and the ink blot appears in the drips of the coffee as he stays up late working on this case. Not only does Rorschach blot open this chapter, it closes it on page 28, when Dr. Long himself tries to make something of it, when he concludes it is only meaningless blackness that people turn into something meaningful to them. The second ink blot Dr. Long shows Kovacs on page 3, panel 1, closely resembles the Hiroshima shadows shown later in the chapter. Through this ink blot, we see Kovacs as a child, when he discovers his mom is a prostitute and gets abused for it. Yet again, he deflects, saying he sees some nice flowers. Then on page 16, panel 6, Dr. Long sees the Hiroshima silhouette spray-painted on a wall, and again on page 27, panel 3, and describes it as they're still trying to console one another. The Hiroshima images also refer to the end of World War II, when the United States dropped nuclear bombs on Japan while Truman was president. On page 27, panel 2, Dr. Long holds a newspaper referring to the Cold War, and although Reagan was president in 1985, it talks about Nixon as if he's president, and the newspaper shows his threats of the U.S. using maximum force against the Soviets and talks about nuclear safety right after. On page 28, panel 3, we see the physical paper of the nuclear safety precautions as Dr. Long talks about the possibility of having to put his wife outside in a bag. A few nuclear signs appear in this chapter, also relating back to the end of World War II and the nuclear bombs portrayed through the Hiroshima images. Blackness and darkness are also a common theme that overlays this chapter. Page 15, panel 5, Kovacs talks about his admiration for the comedian and how he saw the black underbelly of the world. The dress on page 10, panel 3, he refers to it as black and white, but not gray. This illustrates how Kovacs was never in a gray area himself. He was white as Walter and switched to black when he became Rorschach. The chapter ends with the last panel being pitch black on page 28 after Dr. Long realizes the true horror of the world is that we are alone. Different females also appear in this chapter, relating to Kovacs, while Dr. Long believes Kovacs' interactions to them is why he became Rorschach. It is not the first two, but the last one that changed him. The first female is his mother, that we see in the beginning, and the second was Kitty Genovese. Kitty was raped, tortured, and killed while the neighborhood listened, which caused Kovacs to create his new face to disassociate himself with humanity and the horrors of it. But Kovacs became Rorschach when he went looking for a little girl that was kidnapped, and when he found the man, he killed him, and that was the true start of him being Rorschach. Who Watches the Watchmen appears on page 15, panel 6, but it is shown unfinished. In reference to Plato discussing this in the Republic, he says they will watch themselves. Similarly, Rorschach stops the writing because he doesn't care if the Keene Act was passed, as seen in the bottom of the panel. Being Rorschach a vigilante is still something he feels the need to be. Like Plato says, they don't do it because they want to, they do it because it is right, or as Rorschach says, they do it out of compulsion. The title of this chapter, The Abyss Gazes Also, is an allusion to a quote by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you. The title itself foreshadows that Dr. Long's obsession with trying to fix Kovacs will turn his views into those similar to Kovacs. Another allusion is to the Flintstones, but specifically Fred and Barney from the Flintstones, which first aired in 1960. The two German shepherds that belonged to the kidnapper and murderer of the little 6-year-old girl, Blair Roche, were named Fred and Barney, as shown on page 22, panel 1. Erwin Rorschach, the psychiatrist, is the inspiration behind the character named Rorschach in the novel. Herman had an education in art that helped him create the idea of the ink blots that are known today to be the Rorschach test. The Rorschach test was and is used to this day to help determine unconscious personality traits of a patient. This very test is used on Kovacs, or rather Rorschach, to reveal his own subconscious mind. The test was created in 1921 but is still used to this day. The clocks are the final and most common thing that appears throughout the entire graphic novel. Although within this chapter each clock reads 6 minutes until 12, symbolic of the fact that doomsday or midnight comes closer with each chapter.